They said it softly, as if a lowered voice could blunt the edge of the words. "No man will ever claim you, my dear," her aunt murmured, her teacup trembling just enough to set the china tinkling in its saucer. The girl standing in the doorway froze. Hidden by the sweep of a heavy velvet curtain, Marianne watched the scene unfold as she had watched so many others at Ashbourne Hall, unseen, unheard, the quiet shadow at the edge of her own life, pale. Winter light spilled through the tall windows of the drawing-room, turning dust motes to gold, but it did nothing to warm the cold knot forming beneath her ribs. Her mother did not rush to contradict the statement. That, more than the words themselves, made Marianne's throat tighten. Lady Ashbourne sat with her embroidery in her lap, the fine silk thread tangled around her gloved fingers. She stared at the delicate flowers she had been stitching, then said in that carefully calm voice that meant she was worried, "She has had 3 seasons, sister. The gentlemen are civil, they dance, they converse, but they do not stay. They do not stay." Marianne shut her eyes for a heartbeat. The familiar accusations rose up in her mind, unwritten but engraved upon her heart. Too quiet, too serious, too fond of books, not charming enough, not pretty enough, simply not enough. A litany she had never dared say aloud. From the terrace outside, bright laughter rang through the glass. Her cousin Charlotte's voice, musical, effortless, floated into the room. Marianne did not need to look to picture her. Auburn curls perfectly arranged, cheeks glowing from the January chill, blue eyes sparkling with the easy confidence of a girl who had never doubted that the world adored her. Men did not merely stay for Charlotte, they competed for the privilege. "I had hoped," her aunt went on, softer now, "that last spring, well, there was Lord Havisham. He danced with her twice. I thought—" "Havisham married Miss Darrow for her fortune," Lady Ashbourne cut in, a hint of bitterness slipping through her poise. "He never seriously intended anything else." "Still," her aunt whispered, "a woman does like to feel desired." Marianne stepped back until her shoulders touched the wall. The remark was almost comical in its accuracy. A woman likes to feel desired. She knew nothing of that. What she knew was duty, discretion, and the art of taking up as little space in a room as possible. Her fingers smoothed reflexively over the skirt of her simple blue day dress. The fabric was soft from frequent wear, good quality but unremarkable. Her mother preferred it so. "Better not to invite comparison," she had once said gently when Marianne had admired one of Charlotte's frivolous gowns. The words had been spoken with kindness and had still landed like a stone. Enough, Marianne decided. She drew a breath and stepped into the drawing-room as though she had just arrived. "Mamma," she said, inclining her head to both ladies. "You asked to see the book I was reading. I have brought it if you still wish to borrow it." Lady Ashbourne's head snapped up, colour flooding her cheeks. For a moment, something like guilt flickered across her composed features. "Marianne, I did not hear you come in." "I walk very quietly," Marianne replied, her tone light, even teasing. If she treated their conversation as harmless, perhaps it might sting less. Her aunt shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "We were merely discussing prospects," she said, as though giving a dangerous thing a polite name could tame it. "Were you?" Marianne crossed the room and laid the worn volume of poetry in her mother's lap. "I hope you concluded that I shall not crumble to dust for lack of them." Before Lady Ashbourne could frame an answer, footsteps sounded in the corridor, measured, confident. Mr. Alden, the butler, appeared in the doorway, his usually placid face touched with restrained excitement. "Begging your pardon, my lady," he said, bowing, "but a letter has just arrived from London. It appears to be of some importance." From London, in January. The full whirl of the season had not yet begun. Such a letter now meant arrangements, plans, invitations, things that usually concerned Charlotte, not Marianne. Still, a flicker of curiosity stirred as her mother took the folded paper, her hand not quite steady. Lady Ashbourne broke the seal and scanned the neat angular script. Silence settled over the room, taut as a pulled thread. At last she looked up, first at her sister, then at Marianne, as if reassessing them both. "The Duke of Ravensly," she said slowly, "is coming to stay at Ashbourne Hall for a fortnight." Marianne's breath faltered. The Duke of Ravensly was not merely a duke. In London, he was spoken of as one might speak of a masterpiece or a rare gem, wealthy, widowed, striking. Mothers sighed his name. Daughters coloured at the mention of him. He had become a legend as much as a man. Her aunt's hand flew to her throat. "Here? But whatever for?" Lady Ashbourne's eyes returned to the letter. "He has business in the county, it seems, and wishes to renew an old acquaintance with our family." An odd flutter stirred in Marianne's guarded heart. The most sought-after gentleman in England, coming to their quiet corner of the world. It meant nothing to her, she told herself, and yet, in a place deep inside where she had long stopped hoping, Something small and stubborn began, very faintly, to wake. Ashbourne Hall had not felt so alive in years. Within hours of the Duke's letter, the household moved with a curious blend of frenzy and precision. Footmen hurried up and down the grand staircase with dust covers and polished sconces. Maids shook out already spotless draperies, as though a speck of dust might personally offend their distinguished guest. In the kitchen, the cook shuffled menus, muttering to herself as she scratched out dishes and added more elaborate ones in their place. "It is only a fortnight," Marianne remarked softly, leaning against the doorframe of the morning room as two maids wrestled with a carpet. "One might think he intends to take up residence." Her aunt, stationed by the window to supervise some imagined imperfection in the curtains, turned with bright eyes. "A fortnight is quite long enough to change lives when a duke is involved, my dear. Especially that duke," Charlotte added, drifting into the room with her usual effortless grace. She wore a pale green gown that made her eyes shine like clear water. Even in the daylight, there was something of a stage about her. Every movement seemed calculated to be admired. "Mrs. Langley says that at Lady Sherborne's ball last year, he refused 6 introductions in one evening. 6. Imagine the desperation." Her aunt clicked her tongue. "We do not call it desperation, Charlotte. We call it admiration." Marianne tilted her head. "And what do we call his behavior when he refuses to be introduced to 6 eligible young ladies?" "Selectiveness," Charlotte replied promptly with a mischievous gleam. "He is a duke. It is not arrogance when a duke has standards. It is tradition." Lady Ashbourne entered then, a list in one hand and a pin cushion on her wrist, the air of a general planning a campaign. "Charlotte, we must decide upon your gowns for dinner. The cream silk this evening, I think, and the blue with silver trim tomorrow. We must appear quite unstudied, but never unprepared." Charlotte laughed, the sound light and charming. "So we must look as though we did not expect him at all, while looking exactly like we did." "Precisely," her mother agreed. No one mentioned Marianne. No one asked what she would wear. It did not surprise her, yet she felt the familiar twinge all the same. She was given tasks instead. See that the library fire burned warmly. Ensure the guest rooms were properly aired. Choose flowers from the conservatory that would endure the cold. Useful duties, sensible duties, the sort of work one entrusted to someone reliable, not dazzling. In the library that afternoon, she lingered a moment, longer than necessary. The tall, crowded shelves, the faint, comforting scent of leather and ink, the steady tick of the long case clock. This room was as close to a sanctuary as Ashbourne Hall afforded her. Here, she did not feel overshadowed or lacking. Here, words mattered more than appearances. She knelt by the hearth to coax the flames higher, then sank into one of the armchairs, imagining for a moment the Duke himself seated opposite, book in hand. Was he truly as devoted to reading as society claimed, or was it simply one more elegant rumor attached to a man people longed to admire? "You are letting your imagination run away," she told herself, amused and a little ashamed. "He will smile, he will nod, he will dance with Charlotte twice and forget what color your gown was." It was not cynicism, it was learned expectation. The day of his arrival dawned with a hard, glittering frost. The fields beyond Ashbourne Hall lay under a thin white veil, and the bare branches of the oaks glistened with ice that caught the pale morning light. Marianne watched from her window as stable boys hurried across the yard, breath clouding in the air, and Mr. Alden inspected an extra lantern by the drive with solemn care. A knock sounded at her door. "Marianne, are you dressed?" her mother called. "Almost, Mama," she answered. Lady Ashbourne stepped in, her gaze sweeping over the dove-grey gown Marianne had chosen, the neat braid of her dark hair coiled at the nape of her neck. "Yes," her mother said at last, "that will do very well. You look nice." Nice. Neither praise nor criticism. A word that slid off the heart without leaving a mark. "Remember," Lady Ashbourne added, crossing the room to adjust an imaginary crease at her daughter's shoulder, "our guest is an old acquaintance of the family and a man of consequence. Conduct yourself as you always do, calmly, sensibly. You must not let Charlotte's high spirits encourage you into foolishness." Marianne's lips curved faintly. "I cannot recall ever having been accused of high spirits, Mama." For a fleeting instant, something tender crossed Lady Ashbourne's features, a look that seemed almost regret. Before she could speak, the sound of wheels crunching over gravel drifted up from the drive. "He is here," her mother whispered. They descended together. The household had assembled in the great hall, arranged with careful symmetry. At the center, Lady Ashbourne stood poised and dignified. To her right, Charlotte glowed in cream silk, her hair arranged in gleaming curls. To her left, Marianne waited quietly, hands folded, gown simple but neat. The carriage rattled to a halt. The door opened. The Duke of Ravensleigh stepped down with an easy assurance that suggested he had long ago grown accustomed to being scrutinized. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark travelling coat tailored impeccably to his frame. The winter light revealed his hair to be a deep brown, threaded with the faintest silver at the temples, giving him an air of distinction rather than age. His features were not precisely handsome in the storybook sense. They were better, strong, defined, with a mouth that seemed set more often in seriousness than in smiles. Lines fanned from the corners of his eyes, drawn by years of thought and perhaps worry. Yet there was a stillness about him, a quiet authority that made one want to stand straighter. He bowed to Lady Ashbourne first. "My lady, it is good to see you again." "Your Grace," she replied, warmth softening her tone. "Ashbourne Hall is honoured by your presence." Pleasantries were exchanged with easy politeness. Charlotte stepped forward to curtsy, the very picture of graceful modesty, her lashes lowered just so, her blush perfectly timed. Then it was Marianne's turn. She sank into her curtsy without embroidery, eyes lowered not from coquetry but from long habit. "Your Grace," she murmured. "Lady Marianne," he said, his voice quiet and unexpectedly gentle. She looked up, startled that he had chosen her name without a distinct introduction. For the briefest moment, his gaze held hers, not idly, not dismissively, but with a focused attention that unsettled her. It was as though he were comparing her to some image in his memory and finding the resemblance sharp enough to trouble him. "You resemble—" he began, then stopped abruptly. The words seemed to catch in his throat. A shadow passed over his expression, a flicker of old pain or remembered sorrow, there, and gone too quickly for her to make sense of it. Marianne's heart stumbled in her chest. Resemble whom? The words followed her all afternoon. "You resemble—" Marianne heard them looping in her thoughts as she supervised flowers in the guest chambers, as she checked the extra blankets laid at the foot of the Duke's bed, as she walked the familiar corridors that suddenly felt strange with the presence of such a man beneath their roof. She had long ago grown used to being the sort of girl no one compared to anything at all. Charlotte was likened to sunshine, to music, to champagne. Marianne was simply Marianne. To be told she resembled someone important enough to stop a duke mid-sentence, unsettled her more than she wished to admit. By the time they gathered for tea in the drawing room, she had almost convinced herself she had imagined the moment. It was a trick of hope, nothing more. Men like the Duke of Ravensleigh did not look at women like her as if seeing a ghost. He sat beside Lady Ashbourne near the fire, his posture relaxed yet reserved, hands loosely clasped around a porcelain cup. Charlotte had taken the place opposite him, a position that allowed her to be seen at every angle. Marianne slipped into the chair slightly behind her mother, where she could pour the tea and be part of the circle without being at its centre. They spoke of unthreatening subjects at first, the state of the roads from London, the frosts doing mischief in the kitchen gardens, the likelihood of snow. "It is a mercy you arrived before the weather turned harsher, Your Grace," Lady Ashbourne said. "We should hate to see you stranded between here and the next posting inn." "It is not a fate I would relish," he agreed, "but I have seen worse roads in worse places. Ashbourne's lanes are almost hospitable by comparison." Charlotte laughed. "You speak as though you have ridden across wild moors in thunderstorms with bandits at every bend." "Nothing quite so dramatic," he replied, amusement flickering briefly in his eyes. "Only long journeys at inconvenient times of year, the sort a man cannot always avoid." "And your business in our county?" their aunt asked, leaning forward just a little. "Is it of a very serious nature?" Something closed in his expression, politely but firmly. "Business is, alas, usually serious, or it would not be business, but I hope to find some pleasure in my stay as well." His gaze shifted, not to Charlotte as Marianne expected, but toward Lady Ashbourne. "It has been many years since I was last at Ashbourne Hall." "Too many," her mother said softly. There was a history there, Marianne realized, lying quiet beneath their words. She wished, with an almost childish hunger, that someone would speak of it plainly. Charlotte filled the silence. "We shall do our best to make your visit agreeable, Your Grace. My aunt gives excellent dinners, I play the pianoforte tolerably, and Marianne reads aloud very well when we can persuade her to do so." Marianne started, teapot in hand. She had not expected to be offered as part of anyone's entertainment. The Duke's eyes turned fully on her. "Do you?" he asked. I read the words on the page, Your Grace, she replied, struggling for composure. Whether I do it well is for others to decide. A faint smile touched his mouth. Modesty does not always make for honesty, Lady Marianne. The comment warmed her in a way that felt both pleasant and dangerous. She lowered her gaze to the tea service. I merely mean that I enjoy it. If others do, also, I am content. They let the matter drop, and soon, Charlotte had persuaded him to promise he would listen to her play that evening. He agreed with impeccable courtesy, yet Marianne could not shake the sense that his attention, when it wandered from the conversation, wandered not to Charlotte, but to the edges of the room where old portraits hung and shadows gathered. That evening, after dinner, Charlotte did indeed take her place at the pianoforte. She played well, better than Marianne suspected. Even Charlotte knew, her fingers precise, her expression a careful balance of concentration and charm. The Duke listened politely, offering the expected praise when she finished. And you, Lady Marianne, he said then, turning to her where she sat by the window with some embroidery she had scarcely touched. Are you very attached to this music, or might I steal your company for a few minutes? The room stilled. Marianne felt 3 pairs of eyes land on her at once, her mother's in startled calculation, her aunt's in sharp curiosity, Charlotte's in something she could not quite name. She rose, heart suddenly unsteady. If my mother has no objection, she said. Lady Ashbourne hesitated only a fraction. Of course not. Marianne knows the house better than anyone. She will be an excellent guide. He offered his arm. She took it, her fingers light upon the fabric of his coat. He led her out, into the dimly lit corridor, away from the murmur of conversation and the muted notes of the pianoforte resuming behind them. I thought perhaps the library, he said, unless there is some other room you prefer. The library is my favorite, she admitted, though I ought to say the music room after such a performance. You are not obligated to say anything you do not feel, he replied. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the library. Inside, the fire had been laid and now burned low, casting a warm glow across the shelves. He stepped in and stopped just short of the hearth, gaze lifting not to the books, but to the portraits lining the far wall. Marianne followed his eyes. Halfway along the row hung a painting she had seen so often that she no longer truly looked at it. A young woman in a pale gown, dark hair swept back, eyes level and calm. There was something in the tilt of her chin, in the thoughtful set of her mouth, that had always seemed faintly familiar, like seeing oneself reflected in a window at dusk. The Duke drew in a quiet breath. Yes, he said, almost under his breath. That is it. Marianne's skin prickled. Your Grace? She asked softly. Do you know her? He did not answer at once. When he turned to her, his expression was no longer polite, no longer impersonal. There was history in his gaze now, and sorrow, and something like determination. That, he said, each word measured, is Lady Isabella Ashbourne, and she is the reason I asked to come here. For a long moment, the only sound in the library was the soft crackle of the fire. Marianne looked from the portrait to the man beside her, then back again. Now that he had named the resemblance, she could not unsee it. The same dark hair, though Isabella's was arranged in the softer style of an earlier decade. The same steady gaze, a little serious for such a young face. Even the line of the jaw, the unadorned honesty in the expression. They might have been sisters, separated by time. Lady Isabella Ashbourne, Marianne repeated, tasting the name. She was of our family, of course. I know only that she died young. No one speaks of her often. I am not surprised, the Duke said quietly. Families rarely speak of their griefs if they can avoid it. There was no reproach in his tone, only a tired understanding. He moved closer to the painting, hands clasped behind his back, and studied the portrait with the attention of someone revisiting a memory rather than a work of art. She was your mother's younger sister, he said at last. Though in spirit she often seemed the elder, Isabella had a way of looking at the world that made everyone else feel a little inexperienced. Marianne's breath caught. My mother's sister, she echoed. I always supposed she was some distant cousin. She never quite said. He glanced at her. It is sometimes easier to call sorrow distant, even when it is not. Silence pressed around them, gentle but insistent. How did you know her, Your Grace? She asked, stepping nearer to the fire as if its warmth might steady her. Forgive me if I am too bold. You need not answer if it pains you. It does pain me, he said simply, but I did not come here to avoid that. He turned away from the portrait and rested one hand lightly on the mantel, looking into the flames as he spoke. When I was younger, and believe it or not, there was a time when people spoke of me as that boy rather than that Duke. My father brought me to Ashbourne. Your grandfather and he were friends of long standing. I was 23. perhaps. Isabella had just turned 19. Marianne tried to imagine her mother then, Isabella beside her. Two sisters, one reserved and one radiant. It unsettled her to picture Lady Ashbourne as anything other than dignified and composed. Isabella did not care in the least that I had a title, he continued, a shadow of a smile tugging at his mouth. She cared that I could ride at her pace, that I liked the same poets she did, that I did not. Mind when she argued with me about everything from politics to whether roses or lilies were more honest flowers. More honest, Marianne repeated, despite herself. She said roses pretended to be delicate and tragic, while actually surviving every pruning and storm. Lilies, in her opinion, made no promises at all. They were beautiful, and then they were gone. She preferred lilies. He fell quiet, and in that quiet, Marianne heard the depth of his affection more clearly than any declaration. Did you? She swallowed. Were you in love with her? He finished gently. Yes, I was. The words landed softly, like a curtain falling. They did not wound, they simply were. Marianne felt something inside her rearrange itself, some fragile, unspoken hope stepping back to make room for the truth. And she with you? She asked. She cared for me, he said slowly. How much? I cannot claim to know. With certainty. We were very young, and young hearts are often full of many feelings at once. But there was an understanding between us, or so I believed. We spoke of a future, of joining our houses, of the sort of life we might build. What happened? Marianne asked. If you do not mind telling me. He drew a deeper breath. Life happened. Your grandfather's investments suffered. There were debts I did not know of. Your mother was already married. The burden fell upon the remaining daughter. A better match was needed, one with immediate fortune, not land and promises. Marianne felt a faint constriction in her chest, not from anger, but from a weary recognition of how often choices were made that way. Isabella wrote to me, he continued, or tried to. She asked me to come, to speak to your grandfather, to insist upon our engagement. The letter never reached me. By the time I learned she was to marry another, the banns had been read. I came here too late. She smiled and told me she had changed her mind. She said lilies do not last, and that she had been a lily in my imagination, not in truth. And you believed her? Marianne whispered. I believed what she needed me to believe, he said. I left for the continent soon after. When I returned some years later, I heard she had died. A fever, they said. He looked up at the portrait again, his jaw tightening briefly before he forced it to ease. Recently, he added, among some old papers at Ravensley, I found a packet of letters. One of them was from Isabella. It had never been delivered. In it, she spoke plainly of her affection, of her fear, of the pressure upon your family. She wrote that if I could not claim her, she would go where she was sent, but that a part of her would always hope. Marianne's throat burned. She hoped you would come, she said. Yes, he replied, and I did not. I told myself for years that I had been wronged. Her letter showed me the full measure of my own failure. He turned to her then, his gaze steady, the weight of his regret undisguised. I came to Ashbourne, he said quietly, to put her memory properly to rest, if such a thing is possible, to speak with your mother, to understand what truly happened, and, if I may be honest, to atone in whatever small way I can for not being where she asked me to be. Marianne swallowed, her mind whirling with images of an aunt she scarcely remembered, of a young duke standing too late in this very house, of a letter lying unread in some forgotten drawer for years. And where, she asked, do I fit into that, your grace? I am honored to resemble her, but why ask for my company? Why tell me all this? He held her gaze, and this time there was something new layered over the sorrow, a present awareness, not just a past one. Because, he said, when I stepped from my carriage and saw you for the first time, I thought I was seeing a ghost, and instead I found a living woman who carries her features, yet is not her. I would not have you haunted by a story no one told you, and, if your mother will allow it, I believe you may be the only one in this house willing to help me discover the whole truth. Marianne's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Help you? She repeated. Yes, he said. To find whatever remains of Isabella's letters, her journals, anything that might fill the gaps. I do not wish to disturb your family's peace, but silence has never brought peace, only forgetting. She hesitated, feeling the weight of loyalty to her mother on one side and the pull of long-buried history on the other. Outside, somewhere in the distance, the wind stirred against the panes as if the house itself were listening. I do not know what you will find, she said at last. but if I can bring even one forgotten truth into the light, I think I must try. His shoulders seemed to ease just a little. Then we are allies, Lady Marianne. The word made her pulse quicken. She had never before been anyone's ally in anything that mattered. Morning came, wrapped in low clouds and a pale, colorless light that seemed to blur the edges of everything. Marianne woke with the faint, unlikely sensation that the world had shifted while she slept, that somewhere quietly, a door long closed had eased upon its hinges. Downstairs, Ashbourne Hall was already stirring. Voices carried up the stairwell, the cook disputing with the housekeeper over cream, Charlotte laughing at something charmingly trivial, her aunt stressing over the position of a vase. It should have been an ordinary morning. It was not. At breakfast, the Duke of Ravensleigh was his composed self, courteous to everyone, distant with no one. To a casual eye, nothing in his manner had changed. Only Marianne, perhaps, would have noticed the small things, the way his gaze sought hers once briefly when the conversation turned to the past, the way he spoke to Lady Ashbourne with gentle respect, yet did not press her when she deflected questions about the old days. Charlotte, radiant in pale blue, did most of the talking. She described a ball in town, a new modiste, a scandal about a gentleman who had danced twice with the same lady. Ravensleigh listened politely, even smiled at the appropriate moments, but Marianne, spreading marmalade on her toast, felt with some surprise that she no longer envied Charlotte, her effortless command of the room. After the meal, Lady Ashbourne rose with a thoughtful air. "Your Grace," she said, "would you care to see the West Gallery this morning? The portraits there may amuse you, if you have any fondness for ancient ancestors with improbable wigs." He inclined his head. "I should be delighted." "Marianne," her mother added, turning, "you know the family history better than Charlotte. Take his Grace through the gallery and explain who frowns at whom." Charlotte pouted in mock offense. "I know the history perfectly well, Mamma. I merely choose not to recite it." "Precisely," Lady Ashbourne said dryly. "Go and practice, dearest." It was casually done, yet Marianne caught a glint of calculation in her mother's eye. Perhaps Lady Ashbourne hoped that, if this sombre duke must be impressed, it might be by knowledge rather than charm. Marianne was suddenly, irrationally grateful. The West Gallery ran, the length of one wing, long and cool and faintly echoing. Sunlight, muted by the overcast sky, filtered in through tall, narrow windows, painting the floor in pale strips. Generations of Ashbournes watched them from the walls, smiles stiff or severe, eyes following with painted patience. Marianne moved slowly, pointing out the uncle who had lost a small fortune breeding impossible racehorses, the great-aunt who had scandalized everyone by publishing poetry under a false name. Ravensleigh listened, asking an occasional question that revealed he was storing the details rather than merely enduring them. When at last they reached Lady Isabella's portrait, he did not need an introduction. His features softened, then steadied. He looked for a moment very much like a man standing between two times. "Your mother has never spoken to you of her?" he asked quietly. "Only that she died," Marianne replied. "And that it was a sad time." She paused. "In truth, we were always gently turned away from the topic, like being diverted from a particular corridor." "Ashbourne has many corridors," he said, "some harder to avoid than others." She hesitated, then took a breath. "There is an old schoolroom," she said slowly, "one we no longer use. When we were children, Charlotte and I played there until one day, Mamma forbade it. She said it was too cold, too dusty. But I remember that Isabella's belongings had been stored there for a time. Trunks, a writing desk. I wonder if anything remains." His eyes met hers, a question and an answer both. "I will not ask you to go where you feel you should not," he said. "I am not a child any longer," Marianne replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "If there are things there that belong to Isabella's story, they belong to mine as well," she faltered. "To ours, perhaps." A faint warmth touched his gaze, quickly masked. "Then I am in your debt," he said. "Whatever you choose to share with me, I will accept with gratitude and discretion." They parted in the corridor, lest their prolonged company draw notice. Marianne waited until the house settled into its usual mid-morning rhythm before slipping up the narrow back stairs, her heart beating with a mixture of fear and purpose. The old schoolroom lay at the end of a short passage on the upper floor, its door stiff with disuse. Dust lay thick on the windowsill. The air smelled faintly of chalk and something older, paper perhaps, or faded lavender. Broken slates leaned against one wall, abandoned toys against another. In the far corner stood a small writing desk with a curved top, its dark wood dull beneath the dust. Marianne remembered it now. The way Charlotte had once rattled its handle, the way their mother had sharply told them never to touch it. Her hand hovered over the drawer for a moment. "You are being foolish," she whispered to herself. This is only furniture. The drawer did not open. Locked. Of course. She straightened, thinking. A desk locked for over a decade, whose key had surely been lost or hidden. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on the mantel. An old habit of the house came back to her then. Mr. Alden's tendency to keep small keys tucked into the moulding above door frames and mantels, where no one ever thinks to dust, and thus where things remain safe. She reached up, fingers feeling along the edge of the wood. For a moment there was nothing. Then cold metal brushed her fingertips. Her heart leapt. The key turned with a faint, protesting click. The drawer slid open. Inside lay a small stack of notebooks tied, with a faded ribbon, and beneath them a bundle of folded papers sealed together with brittle wax. The topmost notebook bore, in a clear, precise hand, the initials I.A. Marianne eased it open, the pages whispering. The first entries were light, filled with descriptions of rides and books and arguments about flowers, but as she skimmed forward, the tone darkened. Father is not well, at least not in his spirits. He speaks much of accounts and obligations. Catherine worries. She says we must be practical. I know she is right, yet every practical choice seems to cut something living from me. A baron with a heavy laugh is to dine with us next week. I am told he is well situated. I am told many things. No one tells me whether my heart is allowed to protest. The last entry she read ended abruptly, the ink blotted as though the pen had been snatched away mid-thought. Catherine has a plan. She says if we do this, everyone will be spared disgrace. Ravensley will be free from the burden of a ruined wife, and Ashbourne will be saved. I have agreed, but when I imagine his face when he learns... The line stopped there. Marianne stared at the unfinished sentence, her pulse pounding in her ears. When he learns what? A floorboard creaked behind her. She whirled, the notebook still open in her hands. Her mother stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, eyes fixed on the journal with a look that was not bewilderment but recognition. "Marianne," Lady Ashbourne said, her voice low and shaken, "put that down at once." For a heartbeat, Marianne could not move. Her mother's voice, usually so controlled, trembled along the edges. The sound of it, more than the words, jolted Marianne back into her body. She closed the notebook slowly, fingers lingering for a fraction of a second over the indented initials on the cover. "I did not mean to disobey you," she said, setting the journal down on the desk, rather than dropping it, as the command had suggested. "I did not come here to pry for idle curiosity." Lady Ashbourne stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. The soft click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud. "You had no right to be here at all," she said, her tone low but fierce. "I forbade this. Room, I forbade that desk. You knew it." "I knew you did not wish us to play here as children," Marianne answered, struggling to keep her own voice steady. "You never told me why. You never said it was because this room held what remained of Isabella." Her mother flinched at the name. "Do not," she whispered. "Do not speak of her as though she were a curiosity to be examined." "I do not see her as a curiosity." Marianne drew herself up, surprised by the strength rising in her chest. "I see her as my aunt, as your sister, as a woman whose life seems to have been folded away and locked like these notebooks." Lady Ashbourne advanced to the desk and laid her hand over the journal, as though to shield it. Up close, Marianne could see the fine lines at the corners of her mother's eyes, lines that had not been there in the portrait years. "These belong to the past," she said. "Reading them will not change what happened, but it may change what we understand," Marianne replied softly. "Mamma, Isabella wrote of you, of your plan, of a baron and disgrace and saving Ashbourne. I have never known you to be a coward. Why are you afraid of me reading the rest?" Her mother's hand tightened on the journal until the knuckles whitened. "Because," Lady Ashbourne said at last, each syllable sounding as if it had been dragged from somewhere deep. "It is one thing to carry one's own guilt. It is quite another to see it reflected in the eyes of one's child." The room seemed to tilt. Marianne took a step closer. "Guilt?" she repeated. "Mamma, what could you possibly—" "Do you know what it is to watch your father lose sleep over ledgers?" her mother interrupted, eyes suddenly bright. "To see the estate you grew up in balancing on a blade's edge because of his generosity, his mistakes, his trust in the wrong men. To know that your husband's income can patch some holes but not all, that your younger sister's dowry has already been spoken for in ways you never suspected." Marianne swallowed. "No," she admitted. "No," Lady Ashbourne echoed, softer now. "Because I did not tell you. I did not want you to know what it is to look at your home and see not safety but numbers. Isabella and I saw it. We saw Ashbourne crumbling, quietly, beneath the facade, and into that came a duke. Young, honourable, certainly willing to be generous if pressed. I could have let her cling to him, and hoped he would rescue us all. She shut her eyes briefly, as if the memory hurt to look at. But he had his own responsibilities, his own estate. His father was not a forgiving man. Had he married into ruin, I do not doubt he would have shouldered it. That is the sort of man he was, and is. Her gaze flicked to Marianne. But such a yoke might have broken him. I loved my sister Marianne. I would not hand her to a life built on obligation and sacrifice. So you handed her to a baron instead, Marianne said, the words slipping out before she could soften them. Lady Ashbourne flinched again but did not deny it. He was no villain, she said. Heavy in manner, yes, practical. He had a solid fortune, no great vices. He promised to settle your grandfather's worst debts. It was the sensible choice. Isabella agreed to it. Her voice shook. I asked it of her. Marianne's heart clenched. And did she agree gladly? No, her mother whispered. She agreed because I told her it was the only way to save us all. She moved away from the desk, staring at the dust-moated air near the window, as though she saw another time superimposed upon it. I wrote to Ravensley, she continued. I told him that my sister had changed her mind, that she preferred security, that she had seen sense. I thought to spare him the humiliation of knowing how desperate we were, how much we needed what he had. She gave a brittle little laugh. I thought I was being noble. Marianne thought of the undelivered letter lying in Ravensley's drawer at Ravensley Hall, of Isabella's words about hope and fear and lilies. Did Isabella know what you wrote? She asked. Not precisely, Lady Ashbourne admitted. She knew I intended to end the matter with him. She did not ask for the details. She trusted me. The last two words broke on a jagged edge. For years, her mother went on, I told myself I had done what I must. Ashbourne survived. Our father died with his honor intact. You and Charlotte were given a home not shadowed by scandal, and Isabella's death. She stopped, pain flashing across her face. Fever, Marianne said gently. They told me it was fever. It was, Lady Ashbourne answered. But fever finds the weary more easily. She was not happy, Marianne. I will not pretend otherwise. She was too clever to be content as an ornament, too tender to harden herself entirely. She did her duty, she always did her duty, and then one spring when the rains came and the house was damp, she caught an illness and did not recover. The doctor spoke of lungs and air. I heard only that she was gone. Silence descended, heavy and aching. I packed her things myself, Lady Ashbourne whispered. I could not bear to destroy them, yet I could not bear to see them. So I had them put here. I thought time would make it easier. It never has. Marianne looked at the notebooks, at the faded ribbon, at the brittle sealed letters, at her mother. Ravensley has found one of her letters, she said quietly. It was never delivered. He came here because of it. He believes he failed her. Her mother's head snapped up. He believes... He does not know what you did, Marianne hurried on, or why. He only knows that he was too late, that she married another, that she died. He carries that as his burden. Lady Ashbourne closed her eyes, as if the weight of that knowledge pressed physically upon her shoulders. Then we are all ghosts in each other's stories, she said. Mamma, Marianne ventured, will you not speak with him? Tell him what truly happened. He is not here to accuse, only to understand. And I want to understand too. I cannot bear the thought of all of us living in the same house with different versions of the same tragedy. Her mother was very still for a long time. I do not know if I have the courage, Lady Ashbourne murmured, to look him in the eye and admit that I chose. For them both. Marianne took a breath she hoped was steady. Then let me help you, she said. Let me read what Isabella wrote, and let me speak with him. If you cannot yet face him, perhaps I can bridge what lies between. Lady Ashbourne's gaze searched her daughter's face, as though seeing anew the quiet girl she had once called unremarkable. You should have been spared this, she said hoarsely. A daughter ought not to carry her mother's sins. A daughter, Marianne replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice, ought not to live in a house built on silences. Outside, footsteps sounded faintly in the corridor, measured, unhurried. A familiar tread. The Duke. Lady Ashbourne turned toward the door, every line of her body taut, caught between flight and confession, between the desire to hide and the impossible invitation to step into the light. The footsteps drew, closer, measured and unhurried along the corridor's worn runner. Marianne and her mother stood motionless, as if movement might summon or dispel what was coming. The old schoolroom, with its chalk-smudged walls and dust-softened toys, suddenly felt like the heart of the house, small, secret, impossibly full. There was a gentle knock. Lady Ashbourne, came Ravensley's voice. Forgive me. Mr. Alden said he had seen you come this way. If this is a poor moment, I will withdraw. For a heartbeat, Marianne thought her mother would say nothing at all. Lady Ashbourne's fingers flexed once against the edge of the desk, then released. "No," she said, and Marianne heard the decision in the single syllable. "No, Your Grace, the moment is late, but not too late. Please come in." Marianne moved to one side as her mother crossed the room to open the door. Ravensley stepped in, pausing just over the threshold as if the air itself were different here. His gaze took in the small desks, the chalkboard, the dust in the shafts of light, then settled on the writing desk, the half-open drawer, the journal with IA on its cover. He did not look surprised, only very, very attentive. "I had not meant to intrude," he said quietly. "Mr. Alden mentioned that this room had been closed for some years. I thought I might have guessed why." "You have always been quick to guess," Lady Ashbourne replied, managing a faint smile, though not perhaps in every matter. The words might have cut, but she spoke them with rueful gentleness, and he received them the same way, inclining his head. "I deserved that," he said, "and worse, but I did not come for reproaches." "Nor I," she answered. They regarded one another for a long moment. To Marianne, watching, they no longer seemed like a duke and a lady, receiving an honored guest. They were simply two people who had once been young together under the same roof, now older, carrying years they had never shared. "It seems," Lady Ashbourne said at last, "that my daughter has opened a drawer I locked and never had the courage to revisit." Ravensley's eyes flicked briefly to Marianne, gentle, grateful, without a hint of censure, before returning to her mother. "If there is blame to be placed for that, it should be on me," he said. "I was the one who came asking questions that belonged to another time." "You came because a letter called you," Lady Ashbourne replied, "one that should have reached you when it was written. For that delay, I bear some of the responsibility." She moved back to the desk, resting her hand lightly on the bundle of sealed papers. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, yet steadier than it had been upstairs in Marianne's room. "I wrote to you years ago," she said. "You received that letter." "I did," he answered. "It told me Isabella had re-evaluated our understanding, that she preferred security, that she feared the demands of my position. I believed it. I never thought to doubt that it reflected her wishes." "It reflected mine," Lady Ashbourne said. "More than hers." He went very still. Marianne's heart squeezed, but the stillness was not hostile. He simply stood, listening as if he knew that interrupting now would be like breaking a fragile bridge before it was fully built. "I saw my father's worry," Lady Ashbourne continued. "I saw our home slipping toward ruin, and I saw my sister's heart fixed upon a man who could not, in fairness, bear that burden without cost. I told myself I was protecting you both. I wrote to you as though I were Isabella, thinking that if you believed she longer cared, you would be free of guilt. I asked her to accept a different match for the sake of us all." She gave a small, aching breath. "I did not force her," she added. "If she had refused, I would have stood with her. But she agreed, because she loved us, and because I told her it was the only path that spared everyone disgrace." Ravensley closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. There was sorrow there, but no anger. "I thought she had chosen against me," he said. "I nursed that wound like a private injustice. It never occurred to me that the unkindest letter I ever received was an act of kindness. Misguided, perhaps, but not cruel." "I never meant to be cruel," Lady Ashbourne whispered. "I know that now," he replied, "and I know this as well. I could have written back. I could have come. I accepted too easily what I wanted least to hear. My own pride made it comfortable to withdraw." Marianne listened, feeling something loosen inside her chest, some long invisible knot easing, thread by thread. It was not that pain vanished. It was that, finally, it was being named and shared. "Isabella wrote to you," Ravensley said gently. "I have read her words. She spoke of fear, of duty, of love in many shapes. I thought for years that she had simply chosen another life. Her letter told me otherwise. Now your words fill in more of what was missing." He hesitated. "I do not know whether forgiveness is mine to ask." Lady Ashbourne's eyes filled, though no tears fell. "Forgiveness," she said, "belongs as much to the living as to the dead. Isabella is beyond our apologies now, but I can tell you this, Henry." She caught herself, colour touching her cheeks. "Forgive me, Your Grace. Old habits." "Henry will do," he said softly. "I can tell you this, Henry," she repeated. "My sister never stopped caring for you. If she blamed anyone, it was herself. She believed she had been weak for agreeing to my plan. Then we have all been scolding ourselves for the same thing," he answered. The quiet in the room deepened, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt tender, careful. Lady Ashbourne turned to Marianne. "You should not have had to hear all this," she said. "And yet, perhaps it is better that you did. I would rather you know the truth than fill the gaps with darker imaginings." "I do not think I could imagine anything darker," Marianne replied gently. "Only emptier." This is painful, yes, but it is also honest. Her mother's mouth trembled into the ghost of a smile. You have more courage than I ever credited you with, Marianne, she said. I am sorry for that too. She rested her fingertips briefly on the journal, then stepped back from the desk. These are Isabella's words now, she said. They should be read, carefully, kindly. I cannot yet bear to do it alone. If you and His Grace are willing, perhaps in time you might tell me what you find that I can bear to hear. Marianne's throat tightened. Of course, Mama. Ravensley bowed his head. It would be an honor, he said simply. Lady Ashbourne drew a steadying breath. I must go, she murmured. If I am absent from the drawing room much longer, your aunt will imagine a dozen melodramas and Charlotte will invent a 13th. Tell no one yet of this conversation, not until I am ready. She left as quietly as she had arrived, closing the door with care, as though not wishing to disturb the dust. For a few moments, Marianne and Ravensley stood alone among the ghosts of chalk and ink. Thank you, he said at last, his voice very low. None of this would have come to light without you. I only opened a drawer, she answered. You opened more than that, he replied. You opened a door I had believed was sealed forever, for your mother, for me. His gaze held hers, steady and unhurried. In it, she no longer saw only the man who had loved Isabella. She saw the man who had come back to face his younger self, who had chosen truth over comfortable silence, who now looked at her not merely as a resemblance, but as a person in her own right. On the desk, the bundle of sealed letters lay between them, small and frail and enormous. Will you help me read them? He asked. Not all at once, not to satisfy morbid curiosity, but gently, thoughtfully. I do not think I should walk through her words alone. Marianne glanced at the faded ribbon, then back at him. Her heart beat quickly, but it was not the anxious flutter she knew from crowded ballrooms. It was something steadier, deeper, like the first quiet thrum of spring beneath frost. Yes, she said. I will help. A faint smile, warmer than any she had yet seen from him, touched his features. Then perhaps, he murmured, Ashbourne will become, at last, a house of memories that are not afraid to speak. The door latch rattled suddenly, and a familiar voice called from the corridor, bright and unsuspecting. Marianne, Mama, are you hiding from us? Charlotte laughed. Mr. Alden says you vanished in this direction. What secrets are you keeping? Marianne and Ravensley exchanged a startled look, the letters still lying exposed on the desk as the handle began to turn. The door swung inward before Marianne could move. Charlotte stood on the threshold, the light from the corridor framing her like a halo. Her cheeks were flushed from climbing the stairs, her eyes bright with curiosity. She took in the scene in a single swift glance. The dusty room, the open drawer, the Duke, Marianne. Oh, she breathed, a little theatrically. So this is where everyone has disappeared to. I imagined a secret passage and a hidden treasure. Instead, I find school desks and cobwebs. Her gaze slid to the writing desk. Marianne's fingers tightened instinctively on the edge of the drawer, hiding the bundle of letters from immediate view. We were just leaving, Marianne said quickly. I did not expect you to follow, Charlotte. That has never stopped me before, Charlotte replied cheerfully, stepping into the room. Mr. Alden said Mamma and you had vanished, and then I saw His Grace go this way as well. I feared some catastrophe, a fallen beam, a fainting fit. Her smile tilted. Instead, I find the two of you exploring old dust together. How very studious. Ravensley stepped forward, composed, as ever. The blame is mine, Lady Charlotte, he said, his tone smooth but not obsequious. I asked your sister to show me some of the older parts of the house. I confess I have a weakness for forgotten rooms. And forgotten secrets? Charlotte asked lightly. Occasionally, he allowed, though in this case the greatest danger seems to be to one's coat. He glanced at his sleeve, where a fine trace of dust had settled, and brushed it away with a ghost of a smile. Charlotte laughed. You must let Marianne lead you somewhere less dreary next time, Your Grace. The conservatory, perhaps, or the south garden. There is nothing charming to be found in old slates and broken toys. I am not certain, he said mildly. Some stories are worth the dust. Marianne's heart skipped at the double meaning, but Charlotte only shook her head. Well, Mamma is asking for you below, she said, turning to Marianne. She has decided that the flowers in the drawing room are all wrong and must be rearranged at once. I suspect she merely wishes to keep her hands busy. I will come, Marianne answered, in a moment. Charlotte's eyes narrowed, not with malice, but with interest. She looked from Marianne to Ravensley, and a hint of mischief appeared. You must be careful, sister, she teased. If you spend too much time alone with a duke in dark corners, Aunt will begin to whisper that perhaps some man will claim you after all. Marianne felt colour rush to her face, more from the old phrase than the teasing. Ravensley's expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened. I hope, he said quietly, that your aunt chooses her words more kindly than that. Charlotte blinked, caught off guard. Oh, it is only a family joke, she said lightly. Nothing to trouble you, Your Grace. Even family jokes, he replied, have teeth. Charlotte laughed again, airy and unconcerned. You are too serious, sir. Come, Marianne. Mamma awaits, and if we keep his Grace in this dreadful room any longer, he will begin to think Ashbourne is nothing but ghosts. She swept out as quickly as she had arrived. Marianne waited until her footsteps faded, then let out the breath she had been holding. Thank you, she murmured. For what? He asked. For saying that. She swallowed. About words. He studied her a moment, then glanced at the desk. Go, he said softly. Your mother truly does await you, I suspect. Leave these things for now. We will not lose them. Will we? She hesitated. Shall we read them together? This evening, perhaps. In the library. It is quieter there. A flicker of warmth crossed his face. Yes, he said. This evening. She closed the drawer carefully, feeling the letter's presence like a pulse beneath her palm, and followed Charlotte down to the brightness of the inhabited house. That night, the library fire burned higher than usual, casting golden light up the book-lined walls. Outside, the wind worried at the windows. Inside, the clock ticked in its slow, measured way. Marianne sat at the small table nearest the hearth, the packet of letters before her, her fingers restless on the brittle ribbon. Ravensley joined her with a quiet nod. No one had remarked on his absence from the drawing-room. Charlotte had been too occupied at the pianoforte, and their aunt too busy speculating about county neighbours. Shall we? He asked. Marianne untied the ribbon and took the first letter gently between her hands. The ink is faded, she said. We must be careful. They read together, heads bent over the page. Sometimes he took the sheet, sometimes she did. Sometimes one read aloud and the other listened, and sometimes they shared the silence, each tracing Isabella's words with their own private understanding. She writes of you, Marianne said softly, halfway through a page. Not only as a duke, as a solution, but as a friend. She says you listened when others dismissed her. He exhaled slowly. And yet, there were things I failed to hear, he said. Perhaps because I did not know how to listen for fear. She blames herself, Marianne murmured, eyes scanning the lines, for not being braver, for letting duty speak louder than her heart. She calls you kinder than she deserves. Then she was wrong about one of us, he replied. I was not nearly as kind as she believed. Marianne looked up at him. The firelight carved shadows along his jaw, softened the severity of his features. You were young, she said. You did what most would have done. You believed what you were told. That does not make you cruel, only human. He held her gaze. You are generous in your judgments. Not always, she answered, but I have had practice seeing people's better reasons when their actions are less than noble. A faint smile touched his mouth. You speak from observation. From experience, she said quietly. It is a talent one develops when one is often overlooked. People forget to hide their truest selves in front of someone they believe does not matter. Something flickered in his eyes at that. Anger, not at her, but for her. You matter, he said, the words low and unadorned. Far more than those who overlook you deserve to realize. Heat rose to her face, but it was a different warmth than embarrassment, a shy, startled kind of glow. You do not know me well enough to say that, she murmured. I know. Enough to say this, he replied, that you have brought truth into this house where it was long absent, that you have shown more courage in 2 days than many show in years, and that anyone who tells you are unclaimable, his mouth tightened briefly on the word, has never looked with any depth at all. Her heart gave a strange, painful, exquisite twist. She looked back at the letter to steady herself, but the words blurred for a moment. Isabella's ink, Ravensley's voice, her own racing thoughts, all seemed to tangle like threads in a loom, weaving something she did not yet dare name. A soft knock at the library door made them both start. Marianne, came her aunt's voice. Are you there, child? Charlotte is asking for you. She says she cannot possibly choose between 2 ribbons without your sage opinion. Marianne and Ravensley exchanged a glance, the letter still open between them, Isabella's unfinished sentence waiting. Go, he said gently. We will continue another time. She rose, fingers brushing the edge of the paper. As she reached the door, he spoke once more. Lady Marianne, she turned. For whatever it is worth, he said, his gaze steady on hers. No whisper in this house has the right to decide your worth, least of all the ones that say you will never be claimed. The words followed her into the corridor, louder in her heart than any music Charlotte might play. The next day broke bright and brittle, sunlight scattering across the frosted lawns like shards of glass. Marianne felt oddly at odds with the morning's cheerfulness. Ravensley's words from the night before lingered in her mind, warmer than the fire that had lit the library. No whisper in this house has the right to decide your worth. birth. It was a generous sentiment, and she treasured it more than she dared admit. Yet other voices were louder now, older, more deeply rooted. "No man will ever claim you," her aunt had once said. The words and their echo knocked softly against each other in her thoughts, asking which she believed. At breakfast, the dining room hummed with conversation. Charlotte was in high spirits, a pale rose ribbon threaded through her hair, chosen after much agonizing over which shade would best catch the light. There, Aunt's eyes darted between Charlotte and Ravensly with barely disguised calculation. "He has decided to extend his stay by several days," Lady Ashbourne remarked, buttering her toast with careful nonchalance. "Has he?" Aunt Langley's brows shot up. "How very interesting. Country business cannot be so urgent after all." Charlotte laughed lightly. "Perhaps he finds Ashbourne Hall more diverting than dust and accounts. Mamma, do you suppose the county ladies will faint when they hear a duke has lingered in our little corner of the world? Let us not encourage fainting," Lady Ashbourne said dryly. "It is tiresome for the servants." "Our neighbours will not faint," Aunt Langley declared. "They will speculate. A widowed duke, a respectable family, 2 unmarried young ladies." "Aunt," Marianne murmured, warning in her tone. Her aunt waved a hand. "I am only saying what others will. One cannot expect people to ignore such an arrangement." Ravensly, at the head of the table, seemed untroubled. "I am accustomed to speculation, ma'am," he said mildly. "It generally tires itself out if you do not feed it." "But some kinds of speculation are very useful," Aunt Langley persisted. "Why, I recall when your father stayed a fortnight at Ashbourne, it was all but certain he would offer for Catherine. And indeed he did." She smiled fondly at Lady Ashbourne. "History has a way of repeating itself." Marianne's knife slipped slightly against her plate. Charlotte coloured, lowering her lashes with a look that hovered between modesty and satisfaction. Lady Ashbourne's gaze flicked to Marianne, then to Ravensly. Something complicated moved behind her eyes. "History also has a way of teaching us," she said quietly, "if we listen." Later that morning, on her way to the library, Marianne heard the familiar murmur of her aunt's voice filtering from the small sitting room. She might have passed by if she had not caught her own name, spoken with that particular blend of pity and pragmatism that pricked her skin. "Only that we must be sensible, Catherine," Aunt Langley was saying. "You know as well as I that this is Charlotte's chance. The chance. A duke in the house. Smitten, or nearly so. One cannot throw such things away." "Smitten," Lady Ashbourne repeated, her tone sceptical. "He is polite. He is attentive. That is not the same thing. He asks Charlotte to play. He compliments her gowns. He lingers after dinner when she speaks," her aunt insisted. "He is a widower, yes, but not made of stone. And if he also spends time with Marianne, well," a small dismissive sound, "that is natural. She is useful to him, sensible, the sort of girl men consult when they wish to talk about books and memories. But they do not marry such girls, Catherine. You must know that." Marianne's hand tightened on the doorframe, her breath catching. "Do not underestimate her," Lady Ashbourne replied. "You have done so before. So have I." "That is not unkindness," Aunt Langley protested. "It is realism. Marianne has never been sought after. That is not her fault. It is simply how things are. You said yourself once." Lady Ashbourne made a sound that was almost a groan. "Do not remind me what I said, that no man would ever claim her," her aunt finished anyway. "It hurt you to say it, I know. It hurt me to hear it. But we cannot change the nature of the world. Men like Ravensly marry beauties like Charlotte. They do not choose quiet girls with ink on their fingers and too much understanding in their eyes." Silence fell. Marianne pressed a palm to her chest, as if to steady something that had begun to fall inside her. Lady Ashbourne spoke at last, and her voice was low, strained. "And if he were to choose otherwise?" she asked. "If his heart inclined where the world did not expect?" Her aunt gave a disbelieving huff. "Then I should think him very odd indeed, and I should be sorry for Charlotte, who is clearly setting her hopes there. You cannot allow Marianne to encourage him, Catherine. It would be unkind to both girls. Let Marianne be what she has always been, helpful, agreeable, resigned. She is good at that. Charlotte was born to be desired. Marianne was not. It is no crime. It is simply arrangement." Marianne did not wait to hear her mother's reply. She withdrew as quietly as she had come, the old phrase ringing cruelly true in her ears. "No man will ever claim you. Useful, sensible, resigned." She had thought herself beyond such words, armoured by years of lowered expectation. Yet now, when someone had finally spoken to her as if she mattered, they cut deeper than ever. All day she moved through her tasks as if wrapped in cotton. When Ravensly crossed her path in the hall and asked with gentle concern if she were unwell, she managed a smile and some excuse about a poor night's sleep. His eyes lingered on her a moment longer than strictly necessary, but he did not press. That evening, she went to the library as they had planned, the letters a small weight beneath her arm. The fire was already lit. Ravensley stood by the mantel, hands behind his back, as if he had been waiting for some time. "Lady Marianne," he said, turning, "I was beginning to fear you had reconsidered." "In a way," she answered. He studied her face. "Is something amiss?" She set the letters on the table, but did not sit. "Your Grace," she began, wishing her voice did not tremble, "I believe we must not continue this." His brows drew together. "Reading Isabella's words? Seeking the truth we spoke of?" "No," she said quickly. "Not that. I mean, sitting together every evening, hidden away here. People notice, they speak. I would not have you entangled in Ashbourne's whispers more than you already are." "I care very little for whispers," he replied. "We have established that." "I care," she said softly, "for you." The words hung between them, startlingly naked. She flushed, rushing on before he could mistake her meaning. I only mean that you came here to honor my aunt's memory, to soothe your conscience and my mother's. That is good, noble, but I will not let my presence turn something honorable into complication. You are a duke. Charlotte is," she faltered, unable to say it. "Charlotte is what?" he prompted gently. "Everything the world expects of a woman a man like you should choose," she forced out. "I am not. I will not stand in her way, or in yours. We should read Isabella's letters separately from now on, or not at all. You owe her peace, not a life spent chasing ghosts in a country library with a woman no one believes suitable for you." His jaw tensed, his eyes darkening. "Is that what you think this is?" he asked quietly. "A penance? A ghost hunt? Gratitude misdirected? I think," she whispered, "that sometimes kindness can be mistaken for more, and I will not be that foolish." For a heartbeat, he said nothing. The fire popped, sending up a small spray of sparks. Then he stepped closer, his voice low but unyielding. "You are not foolish, Marianne." The name, stripped of title, landed between them like a vow. "You are, however," he went on, "most grievously wrong." She lifted her head at that, confused, vulnerable, braced for some gentle correction. Ravensley drew a slow breath, as if he were, at last, stepping onto a path he had been circling for days. "Charlotte may be what the world expects of me," he said, "but I have had quite enough in my life of doing what the world expects." He took one more step toward her, close enough now that she could see the faint silver at his temples, the lines of care at the corners of his eyes. "Do you truly not see?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "whom I came here to claim?" For a moment, Marianne thought she had misheard him. The words seemed too large for the small, familiar room. They hung in the air between the bookshelves and the firelight, impossible and bright. "Whom you came here to claim," she echoed, barely above a whisper. Ravensley's gaze did not waver. "Yes," he said, "claim, if you must." She used that dreadful word. "I prefer choose. Whom I came here to choose." Her heart thudded painfully. "You came for Isabella," she managed, "for her memory, for the letters, for atonement." "I came because of Isabella," he agreed, "because her voice trapped in that letter would not let me rest, but I did not expect to find you." His mouth curved, not quite a smile, something more serious. "I did not expect to find a woman who looks a little like the girl I once loved, and yet is utterly herself, who listens without flinching, who speaks truth where everyone else protects their comfort with silence." "You are kind to say so," she said, though the words scraped in her throat. "But kindness is not enough to build a life on, Your Grace. You loved my aunt, you grieve her still. You are a duke, and I are the woman who has walked with me through that grief," he interrupted gently, "who refused to let me turn Isabella into a legend and nothing more. You have seen my worst regret and did not draw back. Do you truly think I could mistake that for mere resemblance?" She faltered. "People will say." "They have said many things already," he cut in, a hint of iron beneath the softness. "They said Isabella and I were too young, too idealistic. They said a practical baron was better than a titled husband with a troubled estate. They said you would never be claimed." His jaw tightened. "I have decided I am very tired of what people say." She stared at him, breath shallow. "What of Charlotte?" she whispered. "My aunt says she has set her hopes." "And your aunt," he said, with unusual sharpness, "has mistaken politeness for promise. I have asked your cousin to play, yes. I have admired her gowns, as any guest might, but I have never offered her more than good manners. I have not walked with her through the old rooms of this house. I have not entrusted her with secrets. I have not asked her to help me face the worst of myself." He took a slow breath. "I extended my stay," he went on more quietly, "because every day in your company showed me more of who you are. Not Isabella returned, Marianne, a woman who sees clearly, feels deeply, and still chooses compassion. Do you think so little of yourself that you believe a man could not see and desire that?" Her eyes burned. She dropped her gaze to the table, to the letters lying there like small, fragile bridges. "I am afraid," she confessed, "afraid that you think this is what you owe her, that choosing me would somehow finish a story you feel guilty for leaving undone." "No," he said at once, and there was something in his voice that silenced every other sound in the room. "No, Marianne. If this were about debt, I would spend my life alone. That would be penance. Choosing you is," he hesitated, searching for the word, "grace, undeserved, unexpected, but very real. Isabella taught me what it is to love in youth. You have shown me what it is to love in honesty." The last word trembled between them. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze fully at last. There was sorrow there still, yes, but there was also something new, something steady and present, that had nothing to do with the girl in the portrait and everything to do with the woman standing before him. "What are you asking of me?" she whispered. He stepped closer, slowly enough that she could have turned away at any moment. She did not. "I am asking," he said, "whether if I speak to your mother, if I endure your aunt's displeasure and your cousin's disappointment, if I set myself against every foolish expectation that says a duke must choose brightness over depth, whether after all that you could consider becoming my wife, not because I must fix the past, but because I wish to build a different future with you." Her hand, she had not noticed it trembling, came up to rest on the back of the nearest chair. "You would face all of that?" she asked. "For a woman everyone has always agreed is an unlikely choice." His mouth softened. "I have spent years being the likely choice," he said. "The one people reach for because of my name, my position, my fortune. I find myself far more interested now in choosing what is right rather than what is expected." He hesitated, then added almost wryly, "Besides, Isabella always said I was too cautious. I suspect she would approve of this particular recklessness." A wet laugh escaped her, half sob, half relief. The thought of Isabella, somewhere beyond their reach, smiling at them, loosened something that had been clenched in her chest since childhood. "If I say no," she said quietly, "promise me you will still find peace, that you will not make my answer another wound to carry." His eyes gentled. "If you say no," he replied, "I will accept it. I will still be grateful for what you have already given me, but I will not pretend it will not hurt." He paused. "If you say yes, then we will both have to learn how to live a life chosen for ourselves, not for anyone else." Silence stretched soft and full. The clock ticked. The fire whispered. The letters lay between them, the echoes of a story that had gone wrong, and a new one that might yet go right. Marianne drew a slow breath. "All my life," she said, "I have been told what I am not. Not pretty enough, not lively enough, not the sort of woman men choose. I have tried to make peace with that, to be content with usefulness, to find my worth in quiet corners." She looked at him, really looked, seeing the gravity, the steadiness, the thread of vulnerability he rarely showed. "If I say yes," she went on, voice trembling but clear, "you must understand, I am not a consolation. I will not be a shadow for a lost love. I am myself, imperfect, too earnest, better with books than with crowds. If you take my hand, Henry, you take all of that." His breath caught at the name. "That," he said softly, "is precisely the woman I am asking for." Her fingers curled on the chair back. Then, very carefully, as if trusting herself to trust him, she let go and extended her hand. "Then," she whispered, "yes." He did not seize her, did not sweep her into some storybook embrace. He merely took her offered hand in both of his, as if it were something precious and breakable, and bowed his head over it. "Thank you," he said, and the reverence in those two words stole what remained of her doubt. The announcement, when it came days later, sent ripples through Ashbourne Hall and beyond. Aunt Langley sputtered and fussed about wasted opportunity and the mysteries of male taste. Charlotte wept for an evening, nursed her pride, and then, with the resilience of youth, turned her thoughts toward a future season in town, where other gentlemen would doubtless admire her. Music and her gowns. Lady Ashbourne, when Ravensly formally asked for Marianne's hand, listened with tears in her eyes and something like awe in her face. "You have chosen the daughter I have too often overlooked," she said quietly. "I am ashamed that it took a duke to show me her worth, but I am grateful too. It was she who showed me mine," he replied. Months later, on a mild spring afternoon at Ravensly Hall, Marianne stood in a small, sunlit garden that had once lain neglected. Henry had given it to her as her own to shape. Roses climbed the old brick wall, stubborn and hardy, pruned back and blooming again. Lilies nodded in the beds below, fragile and beautiful, returning with each season. "We have both," she murmured, touching a pale petal. "Stubbornness and fragility, duty and desire, past and present. Henry slipped his hand into hers. And choice, he said. We have that as well. She smiled up at him, no longer hiding, no longer apologizing for the space she took in the world. For years, the whisper had followed her. No man will ever claim you. Now, looking at the man beside her, who had chosen her not as an obligation, but as a partner, who had walked with her through sorrow into something new, she understood the truth. She had never needed to be claimed. She had only ever needed to be seen, and to choose, in turn, the one who saw her. And that, at last, she had done. Perhaps as you listened to Marianne's story, you recognized something of yourself in her. Quiet, dutiful, too often told what you are not, instead of what you are. Maybe you have heard, in subtle or cruel ways, that you are unclaimable, unremarkable, or simply not the type. This story is a reminder that other people's assessments are not verdicts. The ones who overlook you are not qualified to measure your worth. Sometimes the bravest act is to believe someone who finally sees you clearly, and to see yourself clearly enough to say yes to a life built on mutual choice, not fear or obligation. Love that arrives a little later, in a heart that has known disappointment, can be quieter, but it is often deeper, steadier, kinder, and you too are worthy of that kind of love.